Welcome to the Story Fulfilled podcast, where we deep dive into how each character and story in the Bible comes together to fulfill the story of God. Hi, I'm Fletcher.
I'm Abby.
And I'm Jay.
And today's story is Rahab and the Spies.
So as we like to begin each episode with a question, in today's story, spoiler alert, there is some hiding that takes place. And so my question for you guys is, what is a memory or a story that you have that involves hiding?
Oh, man.
Hide and seek. Hide things, hide myself.
Hide yourself.
Hiding
You're
Easter
a
eggs.
tough person to hide. For those of you
Yeah.
that don't know Fletcher, he is like 7 feet tall. Not actually 7
I'm
feet.
6'4"
And
just shy of 300 pounds. There's not a lot
He's
of
a
things
big
that
guy.
can hide me. I'll go first, I guess, then. We used to play this game when I worked at a camp, and you had to get from one side of the camp to the other without being spotted. And we played it at nighttime, and I took this group of guys, and we basically trekked through the mud on the water line between the lake and the bush. And we just, got up to our knees in mud, and we hid our whole way through and crawled through, army crawled in the mud. And we eventually made it, but I got them nice and muddy by the end of it. And we made it. We hid the whole time, didn't
I
get
can
spotted.
just picture you like just leading
Army
these little
crawling through the mud.
kids. Yeah.
Come on, boys, we're going through.
Let's go.
If we're doing this, we're doing it right.
That's
we
so
didn't get
funny.
caught.
You didn't get,
Don't
you guys
get
won
caught.
the game. Good job. Yeah, for me, I really like hide and seek, but it makes me anxious.
As it does to everybody, I think.
Yeah. And so, okay, we're going here. So I was at a family from our church's house, and we were playing hide and seek, and I was in the closet, and I went, and I guess I got really anxious, and I had a little accident. And a little accident.
Was this recently?
No,
Oh.
no. I
Was
think
that a
I was
youth night
9.
Last week.
I think I was in like grade 4 or 5 because I
okay.
was taking piano lessons, and that was in grade 4 or 5.
I want to applaud Abby for telling that story. She told me another one where she was like actually good at hide and seek.
Yeah.
And she chose to tell the
Tell the really embarrassing one that I had to walk a shame out of this family's house. Yeah. The worst
that
part.
doesn't go away as you grow up, I don't think. Like,
No?
I've played games, hide and seek games with youth and stuff in the woods, and
You
and
still felt
sometimes you're like, I'm glad I'm in the woods right now.
Yeah.
You know? So,
Yeah, that was pretty bad.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So we have a story of hiding as well. So when I was at Bible school as a student, there was renovations that were happening to one of the dorms, and the dorm's name was Chalet du Rocher. So that comes into play, and Fletcher can help us with the translation.
Yeah,
It
Mr.
means
French.
Chalet of Rock.
Chalet of Rock. So Chalet du Rocher. And while we were there, so the renovations were taking place and the walls were taken apart. And during the same time, we were being taught the book of Jeremiah. And in the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah is told to take his loincloth and hide it in the cleft of a rock. And so a bunch of young adult male Bible school students thought, hey, we should hide our loincloths in the cleft of the rock. And so we each put a pair of underwear into the
gosh.
wall, and it was drywalled over. And
It's there to this day.
Remains
What
there
a
to
way
this day.
to make a legacy. What a
Yep.
legacy.
Yep.
I hope one day when they're demolishing the building
That
that,
they
they just find a couple pairs of underwear hidden in the walls.
And that's when I knew that I was a Bible nerd, because I found great joy
Oh my goodness.
in putting those
In
pieces
loin
The
together.
very
Cloth.
obscure Bible story.
That's it.
Yeah.
Oh my
that's it.
gosh. Yeah, that's a story.
All right. If you have an answer to that question,
yeah,
as
what's
long as
your-
it doesn't involve underwear, please send it to us by email at story@vfmc.org. Or if you have any other questions, feel free to send that there as well. So as usual, we encourage you to read the story and kind of figure out what it's about for yourself. The story takes place in Joshua 2 to Joshua 6. So yeah, it doesn't take place too much longer after last week's story. It's only about 2 years later. But if you remember last week, the daughters of Zelophehad, it took place near the end of the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And today's actually takes place at the very end of the 40 years of the wandering. So it's about 2 years afterward. So the land has been promised to the Israelites, but there's a problem. The Canaanite city of Jericho is in the way. And through this story, we'll see what happens.
So the story takes place around the Jordan Valley, and just west of the Jordan River is the city called Jericho, and it sits on a main road from Egypt to Mesopotamia. So it's pretty well fortified because of that, because there would be so much traffic going around that it would need to be fortified. And so Jericho is actually considered the oldest continuously lived in city in the world. It sits on a spring that has never run dry, and people have lived there for thousands of years. And the city actually existed way before the Israelites were around. There's a ton of archaeological research done in Jericho because of how old it actually is. And actually, it is the oldest walled city that archaeologists have found, with about 40-foot walls. That's huge.
Yeah.
Imagine
for the time, yeah.
Imagine the
Holy
building that takes place, and imagine the security that you think that you have with the 40-foot walls. Nobody is going to...
And it's actually, it's now a hill. If you look at the kind of a picture of ancient Jericho, because of how much walling there was, and then it was destroyed, and then built up, then destroyed. It's on a huge hill now. It's just a mound of rubble. And so these walls were huge. There's 2 layers to them.
That is
were like
6.25 Fletchers on top of each other. I just did the math.
That was very quick
so
math.
if I was sieging it, I'd have to have 6 of myself.
6.25
piggybackers on me.
Yeah, if you wanted to get
Jericho.
over it.
I don't know if I could carry that many.
Wow.
Right.
Wow. So all of that to say that it would be no small feat for Israel as they came to conquer the city. And the people of Jericho were Canaanites who worshipped Canaanite gods, and God himself has something to say about all of that as well. As for the date of the story, it takes place very close to last week's story, as Fletcher already mentioned. So it takes place around 1400 BC, we think. And the story of the daughters of Zelophehad take place around the 38th year of the wanderings, and so this takes place at the end of the wanderings.
Yes, and so as Jay and Fletcher were saying, Jericho is a major city in ancient Canaan. So again, ancient Canaan was a bunch of different areas in the Middle East. So it had a little bit of Israel, it had a little bit of Jordan, it had a little bit of Palestine. So it kind of covers a bunch of different area. And it sits west of the Jordan River and is on a main road between Egypt and Mesopotamia. It was the first city that Israel took when conquering the Promised Land. And it actually still exists today. If Fletcher was saying like, oh yeah, it's the same, like it's called
Abby
the same thing in modern.
me.
I doubt. I'm like, no, it's
She's
not.
reading
Like
it, she's like, there's no way.
there's no way
still
it's
exists
still
today.
called
Prove
Jericho.
It. And she looks it up.
And it's
she's
like,
oh,
it is, it is. And apparently it's a popular tourist destination because of its nice climate.
Yeah.
So if you ever want to go visit, and if you look it up exactly where it is, it's just north of the Dead Sea and northeast of Jerusalem. And Fletcher put this cool thing about archaeology. How long was that documentary you watched?
It was over an hour.
on Jericho.
On Jericho.
And I thought I was a nerd.
Yeah. Fletcher has a lot of time on his hands, guys.
I learned a lot, okay? It was really cool. There was lots of information about the different archaeological, diggings up of Jericho.
Could you send me the link?
Sure.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, and if you want to send the link to me too, we can put it in the show notes. So if anybody else wants to watch an hour-long documentary about Jericho, and hear that most scholars agree that Jericho was destroyed around the same time that the Bible describes it, and give or take like 100 years, which for us sounds like a lot, but that's really not a lot.
Considering, how many thousand, it was like 3,000, 3,500 years ago, 100 years
or whatever.
Isn't that much.
Yeah, so in the Bible, the Israelites destroyed and burned the city without taking anything except for the bronze and the silver. And it's interesting because in the excavation, they find this burnt layer with burnt barley. The reason most archaeologists think it was destroyed by an earthquake and not captured was because of the barley that wasn't taken. So the army would have taken the food if they had come in and actually done it that way. But we see in the Bible that they were told not to take anything, so it's cool that the Bible actually matches what we're seeing with the archaeology.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I found that was in the documentary.
There you go.
Just before we start the story, we kind of have to introduce a few more characters to the mix. Last week we talked about Moses, and he was leading the people. Well, he's dead now.
See you, Moses.
So Israel needs a new leader. The person that God put in charge is now Joshua. So back when Moses was in charge, and before the 40 years of the wanderings, Moses actually sent 12 spies to scope out the promised land. And 10 of them came back and they went, yeah, the land's great, but there's no way we're going to take it. Like, the people are way too strong. There's giants going around. There's no way.
I love that they say we were like grasshoppers in their sight. Like, what? Really?
Like literal giants too, not like just Fletcher giants,
Hey.
but like actual giant.
And they brought
people.
back like bundles of grapes that were like needed 2 people to carry. So
Yeah.
they're like, yeah, the land is fantastic. There's
These
no
are
way we're
like
taking it.
eventually relatives of like Goliath too, right? Like this is that
Yeah.
So like actually tall people, I think, and they were like 9 feet tall, right?
Something
That's what
like
they said. So just to
Yeah.
give some context here, giants, actual giants.
Actual giants,
Actual
which is very
giants.
cool. But the cool thing is that 10 of them came back and they were like, no way. And then these 2 guys came back and said, the land is great. I believe that with God we can take it. So they actually had faith. And those 2 people were Joshua and Caleb. And because of that faith that Joshua had, he actually became the leader of Israel. If you heard the memory verse, kind of standard issue memory verse, is Joshua 1:9.
Every VBS.
That's right.
Be strong and courageous and do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And that's what God told Joshua when he was about to conquer the land.
What's
Right.
kind of cool is that in the book of Joshua too, so many times, like this is the verse that's quoted all the time, but there's so many times where God's like, don't be discouraged, I am with you. Don't be. That's like when I was reading through it this year, that was what stood out to me. Honestly, every single chapter was, don't be discouraged, I'm with you. Don't be discouraged, I'm with you. And so it's not just that one verse. He told them a lot.
Right.
God was very with
I think
Joshua.
I need a lot of encouraging too if I'm trying to conquer a nation that is
That
way
is
bigger
giants.
than I am.
Right. Well, and, I mean, and that encouragement continues to us to this day. Do not be discouraged. Do not fear, for I am with you. That's
true.
God's promise in our call to live out the Christian life as well.
All right, so it's time to take Canaan.
But first, a quick break from our sponsor.
We're really enjoying putting this podcast together, and we hope you are enjoying listening as well. If you are, why don't you like, comment, or leave a review on whichever platform you're using. Feel free to share with your family and friends as well.
So Joshua sends 2 spies out to scope out the land, and specifically Jericho, because it's the first city that they're going to take. So the 2 men go, and they end up staying at the house of a woman named Rahab, who was a prostitute. And we also think that she was probably an innkeeper as well. So the question I have is that a good place to hide at the brothel? Is it because, you're a little bit ashamed to be there, so everybody's a little, don't look at me, you're hiding?
With all my like FBI and spy experience, I would have to say yes.
When were you in the FBI?
Oh, I can't tell you. It's top secret.
Oh, right.
I'd
Okay.
have to kill you.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think I'd wrestle with that. I don't know. Yeah. Probably
It makes
a good place to lay under the radar.
Yeah.
Probably a good place to lay under the radar.
It's like if you watch those old like Western movies, who's hiding in the back of an old tavern? It's like
Right.
the suspicious guy.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
true.
But I think if I'm telling my kids, hey, if you ever find yourself in trouble, I'm not telling them to
No,
go there.
that's
No.
not
So,
no.
yeah.
Yeah. It'd be interesting.
So it doesn't matter. The king finds out anyway that there's 2 Israelite spies staying there. So he sends his guards to go get them. But when they were asked Rahab to bring them out, she said that they had already left the city. So the guards searched the house but didn't find anyone because Rahab had ended up hiding them on the roof in the stacks of flax. And if you look up stacks of flax on Google Images like I did, they're these big, basically hay bales. But
You
they're-
guys are
they're
like
flax.
having a nerd out competition today. Like, what is this? I feel like
Google
it's like,
Images is
oh,
not
I
much
watched
of
a
a nerd.
documentary. Oh, but I would watch a longer documentary. Oh, I looked up the stacks of flax.
I'm just wondering what images
Oh, I'm
that
looking at it right
like
now.
the
That's
fun side of the
interesting.
internet would give you for stacks of flax.
It was-
Like,
it
is
was
there?
just-
It sounds like a game. Like,
You should do it. We'll
Sassafras.
play it. We'll play it with youth. We'll play the
we're
stacks
gonna
of
make
flax.
a stacks of flax game.
And we'll hide them
Yeah.
on the roof.
No, they have to hide them underneath. Oh yeah, we have a nice roof.
And we'll bring
Okay.
some flax. All right.
Yeah.
Abby, with your FBI experience, I'm sure you could get us some flax.
I will work on it.
So they're hidden under these stacks of flax, and the guards left the city to go search for the men that Rahab said they had left. So Rahab goes up and gets the men and tells them that she knows that God has delivered them into the hands of the Israelites, that everyone in the city is actually terrified because they've seen the works that God did for the Israelites in Egypt and a few other battles that they had with, I think, the Amorites. And she ends up saying, that the Lord your God is the God of heaven above and on the earth beneath. I like that the people of Jericho are actually terrified of the Israelites already. They have this huge city, and they know that God is powerful, and it seems the Israelites don't at some points.
That's it. It's like definition of faith. They actually have more faith in God than the Israelites. That God is going to do that which he said he's going to do, and they see it as an inevitability. They're like, we have looked at the history of your God and the way that he has been for you, and we know that we're done for. It's just a matter of time. And the Israelites who have experienced it firsthand, like the Canaanites have only seen it from afar. They're
Or heard of it.
it. And the Israelites who have experienced it firsthand don't have that kind of faith. And so I'm challenged by that in my own life. Like, what have I experienced firsthand and still am lacking faith in God? Yeah.
So the one person that has the most faith in the city is actually Rahab, because she ends up asking to be spared when the city is destroyed. She knows it's going to be destroyed. She's just like, I ask you to spare me when it does happen. So the Israelite spies agree, and they make a promise to her that she and her family will be spared in the destruction. And then she ends up helping them down the wall, because she lived on the walled section. Little thing from the documentary once again.
Oh, wow.
There's actually kind of an archaeological thing on one of the sides, and on that level that was destroyed, there's a little section of the wall that wasn't destroyed. I found that very cool.
Wow. It's almost like the Bible's real.
Hey, yeah. Don't be saying that to anybody else, though.
Just kidding. Say that to everybody.
Everybody. No. They won't necessarily like you for it, though. So Rahab lets them down out the wall and tells them to go hide in the hills for 3 or so days while the guards look through the area, because they're going to find them otherwise. And she ends up helping them, and they get away scot-free. And they swear to each other to uphold the deal, and they get away.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
And I love the symbolism of what she said that they would, the house would be identified with the scarlet thread that would be a scarlet cord that would be let down from the window. And just the symbolism of the scarlet thread that runs through Scripture. And this is what we're uncovering through the Story Fulfilled podcast, is the scarlet thread of Christ's blood, which is thread throughout all of Scripture. And so, yeah, I just love that symbolism that's there, that says, ultimately, it is the blood of Christ that will save.
That was very English major of you. Good job. Pat on the back. Gold star.
But
Why are you making fun of him for?
No, I think that was a very good one. That was a good one.
It's great.
The scarlet thread of redemption.
there we
Yes. So she's really helpful with them. She lets them out the window and tells them exactly how to get away, and they're very sneaky about it. And then they end up making some pretty intense promises, like if you don't fulfill your end of the deal, you're gonna die. Is what they basically said to Rahab, because I guess their lives were on the line.
Right.
Yeah.
So, little spoiler for you here: Jericho is destroyed, and we're not going to talk about how it was destroyed. That's going to be its own episode.
Or you can go watch the documentary.
No, the documentary was a documentary. It didn't have the destruction. You can watch the Josh and the Big Wall,
the
VeggieTales
VeggieTales.
episode, if you'd like.
That's a good one.
Historically accurate as well.
Very historically accurate. Slushies.
With the slushies. So
Keep
Jericho's
walking.
destroyed, and the only people that are spared are Rahab and her family. And then she ends up converting to Judaism and says it in the Bible that she lives in Israel to this day. And I'm going to assume that's when the author wrote it and not to right now. And then what kind of brings the story through the scarlet thread is in the book of Matthew. When you look at the genealogy from Jesus, you see a man named Salmon. And he's mentioned in the book of Numbers and in the genealogies of that time. And it says that he was married to a woman named Rahab. So she becomes in the genealogy of Jesus and in David.
Right.
And it's really,
So cool.
really cool that she's in there. She's a big woman of faith, and she has faith, and she saves these people. She becomes a Jewish person, and now she's in the line of Christ.
Right. Yeah, she gives birth to Boaz, which is great.
Boaz, who's also in the book of Ruth,
Oh, really?
which is cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we won't talk about that today.
Right.
we can't. It'll
Just
take too
dropping
long.
spoilers left, right,
Dropping
and
There you
center.
spoilers,
go.
yeah. I always kind of heard that Salmon was one of the spies, and they had a romantic thing going on while we were there. There's no evidence for this, so I'm not going to say
Fletcher
that it's
just
true.
wants to start spreading rumors.
Well, it's like in every action movie you hear, you're like, oh, you fall
gotta
in
be a
love
love
with the girl that you
story.
save, or
yeah.
the girl that
or the girl that saves you
exactly.
in this case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Who wouldn't, though?
Hey, there's a twist.
there's a twist.
This brings me to a question for us to consider. Rahab was presented with a dilemma because she had the spies hiding, and she knew that she needed to keep the spies safe, or she knew that the spies needed to be returned to their people in order to come and take Jericho. And so she lied. And so the question that comes to mind is there a right time to lie?
Oh, I hate that question
Right?
so much.
So like
Or is
place yourself
deception a good thing in certain situations?
right. And so you take this example and you kind of put it on to a situation that we might be able to relate to more. And so you place yourself maybe in Nazi Germany, and your family has decided that you are going to hide a Jewish family to keep them safe, and the authorities knock on the door. Do you have a Jewish family hiding here? What is your answer? Right? Is it then right to lie? And I have a leaning, but I'd like to hear what you guys maybe have to say in that.
We're going to preface this with whatever we say does not reflect the opinions of the Barrie Free Methodist Church.
Or the Free Methodist Church in
Yeah,
Canada.
that's right. Nothing we
This
say
is-
holds any doctrine. Anyway.
Yes, this is our opinions only.
All right. So I'm going to go with I think yes, because you see it in a couple examples. First of all, this one with Rahab, and she did the right thing is kind of what you get out of the passage. Another one is there's a story in Exodus with Moses, and when the Israelites were leaving, two of these Egyptian women were told to, kill the babies,
Right?
and they didn't want to do this.
Yeah.
So they said, "Oh, the babies come out too quickly," and they ended up deceiving basically
Yeah.
their Egyptian
yeah.
rulers,
They slipped out of our hands.
and they lied about the Jewish people,
Right.
and it ended up saving people's lives, and then they end up leaving with the Israelites. They weren't stuck in Egypt.
Right.
So I think there's enough cases to think there's cases for it.
Abby, what's
There's a time for it.
I think I'm going to agree with Fletcher here. And yeah, I like your examples. I want to be very careful with my words, but yes, I think you're right, Fletch.
Right. So I guess where I would land is everything in me agrees with what you guys have said. And I guess the question then that I follow it up with, that I would just ask myself and maybe ask just outwardly as well, is had Rahab told the truth, or had the midwives told the truth, could God have still accomplished his purposes? Could he still have done what he had set out to do? And so I'm challenged because I believe that we're called to honesty, and a commandment is to not lie. And in a situation like this, maybe our faith is challenged to say, can God still accomplish what he's set out to do if I tell the truth in this situation? Which doesn't mean that I would when I find myself in that situation. I don't know. In all honesty, it's a very difficult thing for us to think about. And like you guys said, like, we're not trying to make a position for anyone to follow, but it's a good thing for us to think through and to think about how our faith in God comes into those situations as well.
Another thing I just thought of is how you're using that deception. Like, I think of when Jesus is asked about being the Son of God and all these things before it was time, he used complicated parables to try to confuse them into, not directly answering the question. He still answered it.
Right.
He just indirectly said it so they couldn't accuse him of anything. So I think of like if it's not an outright lie, it's still a deception in some way. But Jesus said it, so I don't think it was wrong. Right. So I don't know the answer to the question. You'd have to think about it a lot. Yeah. That's great.
Stuff to think about.
Okay.
nice deep question.
There you go.
So I guess, more importantly for us is, are we going to live like the Israelites who were afraid to enter into God's promise, scared to walk in faith on what he had set in front of them? Or are we going to live like Joshua and Rahab, who actually believed God and do the work that is set before us to take Jericho? And I think that when we look at the response of Joshua and Rahab, their response was, this is what God is doing, and I want to be a part of what God is doing. And it's important for us to recognize the areas in our lives where we might not be doing that, where we might be behaving a little bit more like the Israelites, who saw the obstacles in the way and were afraid. It's funny because I say I don't understand how they could be afraid with what they've been through up to this point. Yeah. Like, the Red Sea was parted, you walked through on dry land, you escaped Egypt, you lived through the plagues, all of this, and yet you still do that. And then if I'm actually a mature person, I look at my life and I'm like, okay, Jay, how many obstacles has God taken care of in your life, and still you behave so foolishly? And
what's worse is that we have the Bible telling us all
Right.
these stories about these people.
Yeah. Right.
And we're still like, hey.
I think Jay said it in one of our previous episodes, but God has given us this promise, and he gave this promise to the Israelites. He has the harder end to hold up. He made this promise to Joshua that the walls would come down. He made this promise to the Israelites that they'd get out of Egypt.
Right.
And he upholded it. All they had to do was believe it and actually do what they're told, which I found really cool. Yeah. So God is the one fulfilling it. You just have to believe it. It's not as easy as it sounds, but...
No. So that leads to our final question. How does this story fulfill the rest of the story of God through the Bible?
Great question, Abby.
Wow, thanks, Fletcher.
Is this the first time you've asked? No, it's not. Every week.
Yeah.
Comes back.
Did you prepare for it this week?
No, because we never do. We discussed that last week, I think.
Yeah, we just go with it, and whatever... no, I'm just joking. I've kind of written down
Yeah, you actually have notes today. Good for you, Fletch.
It kind of comes back to what we were just saying, is the importance of believing God and then actually acting on that belief. So it's all great to say, oh, I believe it, that God's going to do it. Are you going to actually live it out? Mm-hmm. And that's one of the main things.
Yeah.
Another thing that Rahab kind of shows is do what's right, even if that goes against what everybody else thinks.
Right.
Everybody else in the city knew it was going to happen, but they all still wanted to fight Israel, right?
And I think this also, sorry, I might be backtracking but this actually says something about who God is, because sometimes people come across the story of Jericho and they have a lot of problems with it, because God says to utterly destroy, and man, woman, child, like utterly destroy. And so people have a hard time with that. But we see that they didn't utterly destroy, because Rahab was shown grace, because Rahab understood who was in control and that it was God, and she put her faith in God. And so we see here that God is actually saying, when he says utterly destroy, he's leaving the door open to anyone who would turn to him in that. And so the Canaanites had every opportunity to turn to God. They were placed, his power was placed on display. his works were placed on display. They saw it, they identified it, but they didn't turn to him, and Rahab did. And so we see that salvation is available to those who turn to God.
That kind of makes me think of like Sodom and Gomorrah in the city. It's like if there's even 10 righteous people in the city, God wouldn't destroy it. And the only person that they found was Lot, and he was spared. He was the one who was spared.
Yeah.
So everybody in the city had that chance to turn to God, and Rahab was the only one who actually did it.
Right. Yeah. And we see that Rahab is remembered not as her past, but she was remembered for her courage and for her faith, and she's mentioned in the genealogy that we read about in Matthew, as you said earlier, and she's recognized as being a part of the line of David and ultimately the line of Christ.
Wow. Good answer, boys. Good job.
Thank you.
Good job. All right. Well, that concludes today's episode. We hope that you enjoyed listening.
Thank you so much.
Have a great week.
Have a good week. We're working on our outro, people. If you're listening to this right now and you think, wow, they have a bad outro, we're trying to think of something to say.
Thanks, Fletcher.
Bye for
Thanks
now.
for listening.
Bye for now.
And cue the music.